Well, we can start getting started. Like I said, we are recording this, so if anybody misses out in the beginning, they can always just come back to it. But yeah, welcome everybody to another happy hour with Jeremy. Tonight we are going to be focusing on Virginia Distillery Courage and Conviction, their line of single malt whiskeys. We do have with us happily tonight Amanda Beckwith, who is the lead blender and education manager, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so she knows she will be able to teach us very well on the products. And then we also have Mark Baker, who is the West Coast sales rep for Virginia Distillery.
Yep, national chains, but yeah.
National chains, okay, yeah. So this is Virginia Distillery, y'all. So I was introduced to this brand closer to the end of last year, and it was just something there. Wine Warehouse, one of our suppliers that we work with, mentioned that they had this newer single malt that they were working with, and it was interesting to me because it's American single malt, which is something you're starting to see more of in the last handful of years. But usually it's like a company will have one SKU of it, not a full line. So that was really intriguing, and the different styles of oak that they were using and what they were the whole process was really intriguing to me. So I'm excited to have Amanda here because she's going to be able to explain it better than me. But then it's also just really cool. There's the differences, like we're tasting it a little different way than I tasted, but I started with the Flagship and then saw what the different characteristics came from on the bourbon, cask, sherry, and Cuvee. So I'm excited to taste it in this way and see how those expressions change as well. But it was just really fun for me to see the different way that the whiskeys, interacted with the barreling, and then just the style of the single malt that they're doing out in Virginia. Just really cool. So I thought it was a really fun one because I think there's a big resurgence in the Commonwealth of Virginia when it comes to whiskey making or distilling just in general. So that was one of our first colonies and one of the first ones to really be big in that kind of realm of making spirits. And it's also really cool because single malt is also something, we always see it from Ireland, we always see it from Scotland. But America is making some really cool ones, and the Virginia Distillery is definitely, make some of the blueprinters for that. So super excited to have everybody here. I will have Amanda start with us, and yeah, Amanda, take it away. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, it's been really fun to watch the American single malt category grow, and we're founding members of what we call the American Single Malt Commission, and it is not yet recognized by the TTB as a category, but we heard some news into last year, and they're expecting to go ahead this year and announce the official formation of the category. So that's been a huge victory for us. We're the largest independently owned American single malt producer, and I love Jeremy's background because that's my home. You're looking at the two malt bins, and yeah, single malts, it is a single grain, always malted barley, but the single actually refers to the fact that everything comes from a single location. So we distill and we age and we even bottle all on site. And it's 100 acres, mostly trees. And you do get that real sense of place. We've even tried growing barley on site. We need a heck of a lot of barley. Each of those bins behind Jeremy's head hold 36 tons of malted barley. So 72 tons are held in there, and we go through that every 2.5 to 3 weeks. So yeah, it's a lot. The process is pretty straightforward. We have right inside the building where it says Great Whiskey Starts as a Journey, there's a mill, and it's 102 years old. And we go ahead and we mill the barley. It goes into our mash tun. We're extracting sugar. And then for 3 days, we make beer. If you're beer fans, imagine a Belgian or Saison style. So it's not hopped, not bitter at all, just malty and sweet. When I walk through those fermentation tanks, I get banana nut bread, apricots, apple. And then we double distill in copper pot stills. And from there it goes into the casks. And that's when everything really kicks off. So even though our ingredients are just water, yeast, and barley, the barrels bring so much to the table as far as flavor goes. And so that's where things get to what you have in front of you today. And I am very curious to hear Jeremy's thoughts after we go through this order, which he preferred, but I thought, let's break out the different casks and then dive in deeper. So with that in mind, the bourbon cask is when you can go ahead and start smelling, because I'll talk about it for a little bit. And roughly 70% of your sense of taste comes from smell. So I like to do a drive-by, really start thinking about the aromas I'm getting. We are one state over from Kentucky. So as you can guess, all our bourbon casks come from Kentucky. Most of them are Brown-Forman distilleries. Last year I started getting some Willet casks, a lot of Woodford Reserve. There's some Wild Turkey. So you know all the names. What I really like about using these bourbon casks is, by law, bourbon has to age in new charred oak. And then they can't use those barrels anymore. And so the Scotch industry really loves to take those barrels, but it takes months now to get them over to Scotland, to get them to Speyside Cooperage, and then on to the distilleries that are going to use them often. And for us, they'll just call us and say, hey, we're dumping casks today and tomorrow. We'll load them up, have them to you in 4 days. And we'll say, great, we'll be ready. And we can just get them, check the quality, and they're obviously fresh and lovely, and we fill immediately. So it's a very green agreement that we have, and it's very sustainable. But my favorite thing is the fact that the harsher tannins have been taken out of these casks in their first life. So barley is so gentle and delicate. It's the best grain. It's also the most expensive grain, but it has all these enzymes you need for the conversion of starches and sugar to alcohol. But there's also this malty, sweet delicateness. And if you put it in new oak, the tannins could really overwhelm a lot of delicate esters that happen in our 3-day fermentation. So if you're nosing this and getting apricots or other stone fruits, maybe some orange oil, all those notes I credit to the delicate fermentation notes that aren't being covered up. Sometimes I get even lemon zest. And then it's balanced out by the oak. So I get graham cracker and cinnamon. And I would love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to put it in the chat if you're getting different flavors, or unmute and any questions you have or any thoughts you have about the bourbon cask. I did want to note that roughly 50% of our whiskey is aging in these casks. So they kind of form the foundation that we build up on for our Flagship in the big blue tin behind my head, or the little blue box if you guys have that one.
Yeah, I love that citrus note you mentioned. I definitely get like that orange zest in there. Yeah, softer stone fruit. And that's another thing that's really cool about the single malt world, at least in my opinion, is that the different characteristics that you get, because, you know, a lot of American whiskeys, bourbon, you know, a lot of the same characteristics come out where you just get, you know, like caramel, toffee, not a whole lot of stone. Some of the more delicate ones, I have noticed actually a couple of the Virginia distilleries, their bourbons definitely have a little bit more of those kind of softer notes to it. But definitely in something like this, you get those like stone fruits, you get that zestiness. And on the palate too, like the first thing that hit me was the orange zest. And that's just that vibrancy that, you know, is just very distinct for single malt styles.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things about the single malt category, because by law, not only bourbon, but rye, so many different whiskeys are kind of harnessed to the new oak world. And so we're given a little more scope for creativity. Feel free to save a little bit of the bourbon cask if you want to play blender at the end. I don't know how many glasses you all have as options, but I also will point out these are all 92 proof. So if you do want to add a drop or two of water, in Scotland they call that releasing the serpent. So if you're a wine drinker, you're going to swirl your glass, open it up. I wouldn't do that with 92 proof alcohol. I mean, you can look at the legs in the glass, but adding just a drop or two of water, you're being the chemist. And so you're oxidizing it and releasing different notes. So you'll probably, if you do that with the bourbon cask, start to get more vanillins coming out. You'll see a lot of transformation. But also if you just let it sit for even 20 minutes, you'll see massive new notes coming out, because this whiskey just opens up in a really beautiful way. I think all of these whiskeys do. So there is range to play with them. All right, big jump next. The smallest casks we age in are these 52-gallon former bourbon casks. So now we're going to the largest ones, the sherry casks. And what's really different is a lot of places finish in sherry casks, but this product right here, the sherry cask, is all primary maturation. And you guys have probably had Glenmorangie and Macallan. You're familiar with PX sherries and Oloroso sherries. We use those. We also use Fino sherry casks. So we're going for a lot of complexity. And sometimes I use true Spanish oak. I'm even playing around with some Amontillado sherries. So having more tools to play with and select from makes for a very complex sherry cask aged American single malts. And I get so many different layers, from the Fino tropical fruits like candied pineapple, from the Oloroso more nutty caramelized hazelnuts, from the Pedro Jimenez, it's almost like leather and deep chocolate and barrel spice. So all those things come together. And yeah, I, again, love to hear your thoughts.
Mm. Yeah, that nuttiness, I mean, that's that classic, sherry characteristic that comes from there. But yeah, that tropical fruit, again, that fruitiness is very distinct in these whiskeys. And you definitely, I get that nice, like, little bit of a, I mean, I don't want to, characteristics of what you would get in like a rum cocktail, like, like a tiki drink, but not any of that sweetness, just that fresh kind of fruitiness to it.
Yeah, I know. This actually has made some really cool cocktails. I have friends who are chefs and they were playing around with it. And I was like, man, I wouldn't mask this at all, but it does really bring out some cool notes. I always feel like complexity is what I'm going for. If I want to make a really good product, it needs to check a lot of different boxes and have layers to it. So I think this one is one of the most complex come up with so far.
Hey, Amanda, so the sherry casks, they're all imported then from Spain?
From Spain, yes.
Okay, and once they're imported, before you store the whiskey, what do you do anything to them prior to? So what's the preparation of?
Yeah. So we actually have a process on the next cask that I love talking about. The sherry casks all pretty much come from one bodega in Spain. We have a relationship that we were kind of brought into thanks to my mentor, Jim Swan. And so they have a requirement of keeping the staves hydrated with at least 18% liquid before they ship them out. So we receive them and we do a little dump to get out the remaining liquid in those casks. So that's our first process. We do a QC. We're making sure that the sherries haven't been sulfured, that there isn't any off note or anything like that. And then we fill as quickly as possible. That's the big key. We don't want the staves drying out. They would leak. They could also develop bacteria, all sorts of things. So it's more of a all hands on deck. Sherry comes in, ready to roll. And it's funny because we didn't know what we didn't know at first. And so we stored our sherry butts on the Solera style system.
All right.
And you can imagine we're not just topping them off and reusing them. When we're done with them, we give them away, or we sell them. So we had a really hard time accessing them. So we had to create these custom pallets that are extra strong.
Okay.
And now we palletize our sherry casks to make them more accessible, just like we do our other cask types. So that was the biggest lesson learned about 3 years ago. We thought, oh, now that the whiskey's been aging for so long, we need to access it, and we can't just take a whole row down.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Another quick thing I noticed that the color on this is a little darker than the first one, which surprises me a little bit because I would have thought, the charred bourbon cask would have had. I would have thought that one would have been darker color than this one.
Right. We never use caramel coloring, so it's a real insight into what the whiskey is picking up from the cask. And the fact that these are used bourbon casks, in their first life, we make sure that the whiskey has been already in there for at least 4 years before we take them from Kentucky. So a lot of those tannins and the colors are being stripped out. So it's not only gentler on the palate, it's more delicate color-wise.
Color-wise, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, in addition to not using caramel coloring, we have this motto: we let the whiskey tell us when it's ready. And so my first releases were, I think the youngest ever picked was 3 years, 3 months. Last year, I didn't pick anything younger than 4 years. And this year, it's all looking like 5 and up. I never want to get to the point where the whiskey's become overaged and tannic and we're losing some of this beautiful stone fruit notes and other delicate esters. So that's the fun job. And so there is a lot of seasonality when we're selecting casks. It's just like, okay, this is a good window, this isn't.
Is that typical of American single malts then, to not age as, like, we're so used to 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, Scotch single malts, and I don't see that obviously a lot in American single malts.
Yeah, so one thing I like to talk about is the fact that Scotland has all these regions and it's smaller than the entire state of Virginia. So if it gets that many regions, you can expect a lot of difference in the US, the different regions making single malt. So a big comparison would be Balcones in Texas. They have a 1 loud and proud on their label. And they're right outside of Waco. It's incredibly arid and dry. So if they were to age even 2 years, they could have some real problems, incredibly tannic, aggressive, over oaked. So they're not doing it very long at all. I know a lot of distilleries even add water to their whiskey as it's aging and do some proofing down just a couple months into the process. We have a lot of humidity, so it's the opposite. We fill at highest ABV possible, 62.5. And by the time I'm selecting casks 4 years in, my average ABV is 59.5. So it's a big difference. And West Coast too, Stranahans in Colorado, they age very different times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the altitude definitely plays effect. It's funny that you mentioned balcones because that was our last tasting we did in 2021. So so some of these folks are at that one too. So that's a fun connection. But one question
Jared Pinstead doing that one, or who did that one with you?
No, it was I'd have to look that up. Sorry, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But
I just worked with some of those guys and they're great.
Okay, yeah, for sure. But no, one question I had for you, Amanda, was that I mentioned kind of earlier that in Virginia you're starting to see more distilleries pop up. So since you've been with Virginia Distillery for 7 years, is that something you've noticed as well? Is that there's a little bit of a resurgence of whiskey in the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. It's funny because you mentioned the history in Virginia before, and Kentucky wasn't even a state when bourbon got started. Bourbon was originated in Virginia. So that's a cool connection. And the largest commercial distillery in the late 1700s was in Virginia. It was at Mount Vernon, and it was ideally going to be a single malt distillery. There was a Scottish master, at the time he was a farmer, and he came over, his name was James Anderson, and he was hired by George Washington to be his farm manager, and he convinced him to have a distillery. But the soil at Mount Vernon was so rocky, they had to make do and did rye, which is what so many farmers all around the nation started to do. And so bourbon and rye became big, and single malt was like, well, good luck growing the barley. So it took years of technology to catch up. And I love that history. I'd say today, the big things I'm starting to see are more bourbon in Virginia, which is really cool. There's some rye. We've got A. Smith Bowman in Fredericksburg, Catoctin Creek up closer to Maryland. They're great guys. And there's a little bit of gin making a resurgence as well. So very fun. We're still the only guys really focusing on American single malt in Virginia, but I think it's hopefully just a matter of time before some more kind of pick it up and get into the game.
Oh, very cool. And it was Alex Elrod who was on the balcones tasting.
Yes, Alex is fun. I've met him a couple times.
Yeah, he seemed like a really nice guy. He was really fun that night for sure.
Awesome. I love it. Oh, yeah, my whiskey's really opening up, which I love. So roughly 50% of the whiskey aged in used bourbon casks goes into the Flagship, and roughly 25% sherry cask goes into our Flagship. I mean, every batch is a little bit different. Sure. And the biggest way to play around is how much of what type of sherry cask. So I mentioned Fino, Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez, also true Spanish oak, which is pretty rare. We've gotten some really gorgeous casks that bring a lot of coffee and chocolatiness. So the next batch that was just bottled really brings more of that in. So it's fun to play. But the next cask is my absolute favorite to work with. We call it the Cuvee cask. And this might answer the question that Mike asked a minute ago. So in their first life, these barrels held a premium red wine blend from Europe. We traditionally start with Spain and Portugal, and I've just placed an order from France, which is arriving in a couple of days. So premium red wine, we know it's the best of the best. It's emptied out, and they shave, toast, and lightly char the staves before our whiskey goes in. So this really enlivens the wood sugars and brings out some really great notes. And in the industry, this process is called STR, for shave, toast, and rechar. And it's a little confusing because wine casks typically aren't charred to begin with. So I think it got blurred with the dechar, rechar process of a couple cooperages. And so we call it Cuvee, and that's the first run of a premium red wine blend in Spain. So we thought that's kind of cool, and it's alliterative. So there you go, Courage and Conviction Cuvee cask. And yeah, nosing it, I get so much chocolate. These are my favorite barrels. And if you're a red wine drinker, this will probably check a lot of boxes for you. I always get red fruit from raspberry and cherry all the way to blood orange, ginger, pecan. And the chocolate varies from cask to cask. It can be like a dry cocoa or mocha or a decadent milk chocolate ganache. So yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, this was actually the one when I first tasted everything, the first taste of the Courage and Conviction line, that I liked the most. This was actually the first one we brought into the store as well. And yeah, it definitely had the like chocolate covered cherry aspect to me that I really liked. It had the nice cocoa and then like that kind of dark, rich fruit on the back end too. But yeah, no, this was the one out of when I was tasting that, I was like, oh, okay, like this is the one that really stood out to me at that time.
Yes.
I agree with you.
It's a general consensus. I mean, I know me personally, when people ask me which one, or which one I'm grabbing whenever I get home after working all day, is the Cuvee. Just it hits all the notes for me.
I would second that. I've tasted a lot of single malts in my time, and this is just incredible. I mean, just such a beautiful mouthfeel. And like you said, Jeremy, it's hitting a lot of notes all at the same time, and you get a lot of really good fruit, and all the things that you would expect in a nicely balanced single malt, and beautiful color, and yeah, top of my list right so far. On that note, I mean, as far as production of the 4 that we're tasting, are they all about made in the same quantities, or is the Cuvée a lot less production wise?
I would say it's almost equal parts sherry and Cuvée in inventory, and that's because I'm such a huge fan of it. It's kind of unheard of. Our mentor, Jim Swan, created this type with a couple of his connections in Spain and Portugal. This whole process was his way to work around unique climates that are super humid, and well, what he called Virginia was subtropical. So yeah, it was one of those things where we tried it and we thought, this is exquisite. And they're some of the most expensive casks we have. So it's crazy that they're almost a third of our inventory. And that is pretty unheard of. There are more and more distilleries picking up on the process, but the fact that we stick with premium European red wine casks and kind of control that process, exactly how much is shaved, exactly the level of toast, exactly the level of char. I often do just a level 0 heavy toast instead of a char. So yeah, it's one of the things where we keep a tight rein on it, and I love them.
Is it a challenge, from batch to batch to keep the same flavor profile?
Yes.
Or does it vary depending on, the state of the barrels that you might get in that particular year?
There's huge variance. So I have a couple tricks to kind of maintain the core DNA from batch to batch. And part of it is always holding back some of the prior batch to use as kind of a base to blend in. And then I will do side by sides, but I don't want batches to be exactly the same because I want to keep making things better.
Yeah, no, I totally, that makes sense. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
and as we release, we do single barrel programs, I've yet to have 2 single barrels that even tasted remotely similar. From all 3 lines, but especially the Cuvée. I mean, one is, straight molasses, and the next is cocoa nibs, and then I've got another that's orange peel and cherries, and it's really, really cool to see the different barrels. I mean, that are legitimately side by side in our cask house.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little curious on that. You mentioned that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was waiting. So far, this is my favorite, the Cuvée.
I'm so glad.
It has a wonderful long finish on it.
It stays around forever. I like my whiskey to teach me a lesson, and this one teaches you a long lesson.
And it evolves as time goes by, as the finish goes on. It's really sweet.
Yeah, that's a great note, Michael. Because this one, like the spice notes come, and then after it elongates a little bit, you get more of those chocolatey kind of, at least to me, like I got more of those chocolatey notes as it got bigger on the mouth, or, as you started resting more. And yeah, it's an evolving piece, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And Kelly?
Oh yeah, I was just curious because you mentioned that you've kind of been switching some of your age statements. Is there a way to identify the different batches on the bottle? I mean, I noticed I do have a larger bottle, so some of you might be able to see. It does say on the back,
Harry Coburn.
But I was curious because I think I got these ones. I think I got pretty close to the launch. But where would we identify, or where should we go to see more info about each of the bottles that we're picking up off the shelf?
I love that question. We are super geeky at the distillery. So we created a website called batch.info. And if you just type that in, there's no .com or anything, you can find all the details. So for example, our very first batch was our smallest one. It was just a flagship, and it was only 37 barrels. It was 21 used bourbon casks. It was 10 Cuvee casks and 6 sherry casks, exactly a breakout of 2 Fino, 2 Oloroso, and 2 PX. I don't expect anybody to remember that information. I can't even from batches 2 on because they got so big. But if you go to that website, you'll see not only the number of barrels that went in, you'll see things like temperature ranges, evaporation rates from the cask, and you'll find out who those people were. Our founder, George Moore, who we named the first batch after, had a saying for every occasion, and one of his favorites was, "We'll have the courage of your conviction." So we named the whole American single malt line after him. And so, yeah, every one of the people that will occasionally create a batch just to say this is special, like Harry Coburn, he was the engineer at Bowmore in Scotland, and he had been in the industry for decades. He's 85 years old now, and he's one of my closest mentors. I email him every week. He celebrated his 65th wedding anniversary with his wife last Wednesday, and so he taught me so much. He is such a cerebral brain, and so we honored him with naming a batch after him. So you can find out about Jim Swan, Nancy Fraley, who's my other big personal mentor, and yeah, thanks for the question, Kelly.
Yeah. That's actually interesting, because I was wondering that, because I did notice on the tins that there were names on the top of like the top or the covers, and I was just like, it was just a different, each one had a different one, like the bourbon and the Cuvee and the sherry, they all had different names on the top, and I was like, I wonder what that's for. So okay, yeah, that's cool.
It's a little bit more intimate than going batch 1, batch 2, batch 3. I mean, it's, you know, that because the American single malt category in general owes, well, everything to people like Nancy Fraley and Jim Swan and Harry Coburn. So
yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, you mentioned Mr. Coburn from Bowmore, which happens to be one of my favorite single malts from Islay, right?
Yes.
And you know, I like all kinds of single malts, but that one in particular. Now I'm just curious, is there any room for peat in American single malt? Or is that unknown? Or is it only done in Scotland, I guess?
No, there are ways to do peat. I'm always hesitant to introduce it through the barley itself, because once it goes through our mill and into our mash tun, then it's going to be embedded in there, and we take a while to be able to clean it out and then move into the next product. So my thought was, well, why don't I get the casks that have already held peated scotch in them? Or why don't I do a peat smoke of a barrel, because then I'm controlling it on the back end. So our founder, George, passed away, but his wife is still our chairwoman, and she spends half her time in Ireland. So she got me some peat to play around with, which was fun. And I've got a couple of Islay casks too, because thanks to people like Harry, we had some really great hookups. But the other fun answer to your question is we have another product line called VHW. And it's actually an American blended malt. And so unlike most blended whiskeys that have 30 to 40 different whiskeys in every bottle, like Johnny Walker or Dewar's or Famous Grouse, it's just 2 single malts married together, ours and a whiskey distilled and aged in Scotland. And then instead of just bottling it, we move it into a second cask to finish. And my favorite, if you can get your hands on it, is a port cask finish. And often what we select from Scotland does have a little bit of peat. Not a lot. It's very delicate. So if you like the Bowmore, it's kind of in that light, subtle, smoky. Yes. And it's very balanced out. And this is a product that's won World Whiskey Awards Best in Category every year since we released it until this year, where it still got gold, and another whiskey I did.
Well, that sounds absolutely beautiful. So Jeremy, see if you can lay your hands on some of that stuff for us, okay?
I'll talk to my supplier and see what I can do.
Okay.
The port is one of my, I mean, it's, if I'm not drinking Cuvee, I'm drinking port. It's very, you know, it's all port on the front end with just a little hint of that peat on the back, and it just mashes really, really, really well.
Yeah. We give a lot of our used casks away. In Virginia, we're kind of surrounded by wineries and breweries and cideries. And so we use true port casks from Portugal, but we've also started to play around with local Virginia wineries who do port style dessert wines. And it's so fun to do that, to trade casks back and forth. We also do a cider cask finish, and it's the same thing. We'll give our used casks to a local cidery. They'll age their cider in the whiskey barrels, and then we'll take them back, and it's just really fun.
Oh, well, that sounds like a win-win situation right there, doesn't it?
It is, yeah, showing off the local flavors. All right, well, now that you've tried all three, I am very curious to hear your thoughts on how we bring it all together. And if I had to compare our Flagship whiskey to other single malts out in the world, if you're a Scotch drinker, more of a Space cider Highland style, it is not peated. I love a lot of Japanese whiskeys. So kind of that complex, layered, giving a nod to Scotland, but it's all distilled and aged on site. And yeah, now you've gotten to know the different barrels that I select from. I'm curious to see if you're going to pick up any of those notes that we met along the way, or if it's totally different.
So Amanda, one question I did have for you, and just wondering something, or if you can elaborate on it, is the skill and the art that it takes to actually like blend this stuff together. Because as you said, you don't want everything to taste the same, so it's, you know, you are mixing it up a little bit. But you know, I was recently listening to a podcast. They talked about like the minuscule amount they actually use to first taste with, and then they go on to the bigger format, which makes sense because now you're going to go through a barrel just making sure what the blend is properly. But just if you can go just into a little bit about like what it actually takes to make these blends, you know, the work you do before you actually get to the part of, okay, so this is what we're going to do in the barrels.
Yeah. So we have two large cask houses. They're metal clad. Our first cask house was a dunnage style built into the hillside, and at capacity it only held 600 casks. So our larger ones hold 6,000 each. And so every week I dedicate 3 to 4 days going up into the cask house, pulling samples and just doing cask analysis and grading the casks. And the grades are based on two big things. One is readiness. Is it immature? Is it, you know, mature? Is it, you know, prime? And so I'm going through and seeing how it's progressing, but I'm also looking for quality. Is it a C level, which is very foundational, what you'd expect? Is it B, where it's checking a lot of boxes from floral or fruit to barrel spice to, you know, something nutty and caramelized? Like, is it checking layers for complexity on its own? Or is it an A where, wow, this cask right here is just doing its own solo way up in the clouds, and it's really distinct, and I really dig all that, you know, butterscotch lemon. Like, where did that beautiful brightness come from? I want to bring that together. So when I get to know the casks, I'm immediately assigning them where they're going to go. And it could be, wait, it's not ready yet, or it could be, you know, this is going to work really well in our Flagship. This is going to work really well as, you know, just the sherry cask blend. Or occasionally, this is a honey barrel, and it's usually a B2 plus or a B1 that I would say this is a honey barrel. And that's where it's checking all those boxes for complexity. And I think even though it has a high ABV, it's not too angular or hot. Like, it's got a great mouthfeel. This is ready to roll as is. And then that's when I'll say, hey, Mark, I'm pulling samples and I've got this cask that I really like. So here you go. And then he finds a good home for it and makes my heart happy. So
nice.
That's the first step. That's only the very first. So then last year, I finally got my dream come true, and the team built a vatting house. So inside this, I have tanks. And before this, I had to steal fermentation tanks from our distillers. So we called it whiskey musical chairs, but they're these big 10,000 liter stainless steel vats. And so I was using those to start doing my blends and reductions. But yeah, usually I have samples from all the casks. I do small prototyping up in what we call the whiskey war room. And then once I feel like I'm in a good place, we'll start building the bigger actual batches. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of work. The other part of this is reduction. So when our distillate comes off the still, it's high as 78% ABV. It has to have water to bring it down to 62.5. That's the law. And so a lot of places do even more water reductions. We don't, because Virginia is incredibly humid. And so in that process of breathing in and out in the casks, in hot weather, the staves are opening up, and breathing in the spirit, cold weather, they're contracting and pushing it back out. There's color and flavor happening. evaporation happening, which can be really heartbreaking, but also water vapors being pulled in. And so I think I told you earlier, after 4 years of aging, we're seeing like 59.5. I still, after I do my blending, need to reduce it down to 46% ABV unless it's a single cask. And so we call it landing the plane, and it can take months because we only do like 1% water additions a week. And sometimes we have a week or two just as rest to let it really marry together. So it takes sometimes, I've spent once 13 months blending and reducing a product. Oof. So yeah.
Labor of love, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, Amanda, is it just you that's doing all of this, or is there like a panel of people there at Virginia Distillery that's kind of helping you do this?
I have two people that I would be lost without. Brian Hersey is our cellar and warehouse manager. So he's the guy. I have two other guys on forklifts to help me as well. So I can drive a forklift, but they don't want me on there because they're terrified something will happen to me. So they'll pull the barrels down, I'll drill in, but Brian also can bring me samples if I'm stuck on a call or something and need to work fast. He'll bring me everything I need. He's amazing. I call him the shepherd of the casks. So he's the one making sure everything is palletized and tracked well for me. So he's a lifesaver. And then Dustin Castor is our distillery manager, and he has a phenomenal palate as well. So I'll pull him in and he'll help me set up blind tests for myself. So we'll do triangle tests, and he'll have two that are the same, one that's different, and I won't know what it is. And so he's always like my right hand to get everything set up, and also to be that other person to say, I really like this, what do you think? And his favorite product by far is the sherry cask. So he wants in on every blend of those.
When they find the honey barrels and call me and tell me that I have something new to sell, it's always the three of them. And then I'm always, working, and they're sitting in the cask house with full glasses of whiskey that they need me to go put it into the market.
He's not lying.
Work is different for different levels, like we have people that come into our store who see us tasting, and it's like, oh, that must be fun. It's like, sometimes it is, but I'm still working. It's not always, even when some of my favorites like Kelly Bird come in and sit with me, it's a great time. Still working though, technically. It just depends on how you define your work.
That's so true. Yes, absolutely. Well, we were talking. Oh, go ahead.
Working hard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very true. Well, I was wondering if you guys wanted to guess what our evaporation rates were, because in Scotland you lose about 2% your first year, and then it goes to 1%, and then after long enough it's not even 0.5% of angel share a year. Twice as much, 3 times as much. What do you think we're getting?
Well, the humidity is a big factor there, because that wetness kind of like keeps everything down a little bit, I would think. But...
I would have said the other way, maybe less than.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'd go somewhere in the low double digits, somewhere between that like 10 to 15%. Yeah.
All right.
Anybody else want to guess? It's gonna make me look like a fool.
I'm gonna throw in a solid 12.5%.
There you go.
That's right.
Price is right, me.
Any other guesses?
Not a clue.
It's okay to be wrong, guys.
Yeah, so there are in fact casks that have had more than 12% loss in a single year, which is heartbreaking. And part of it is the big temperature swings. Our first year was the scariest. Thankfully, after that first year, it settles down a little bit more. So we've seen highs of 108 and lows of -4. And the big challenge for us is we can see a 60-degree variance within 24 hours. So in Scotland, it's like spring, summer, fall, winter for the cask. It's very consistent. In the Highlands, it's like 45 Fahrenheit all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's incredibly different. And so we're now seeing 3 to 6% on average. It's much, much better, but there are still some casks that can lose 15% in a year. So that's the motto. We'll let the whiskey tell us when it's ready. And I never want to get to a part where it's so over oaked, or, we could wait 20 years and have some bone dry casks. So age is just a number, and it's not a level playing field at all if you're looking at Scotland or Ireland or England and us.
And yeah, you mentioned this earlier and I forgot to note it then, but yeah, I love the idea of like not over aging anything. Because yeah, you definitely see those where you get to like that 10+ time, and to me, a lot of those can just be over oaked, where you're just like, it's like, what's the point of having all these really delicate ingredients that you put in here that now just taste like wood? So no, it's really cool that that's one of y'all's focuses, or one of your focuses, is to make sure that the spirit inside is the star, not what it was aged in.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be older to be good,
Exactly, yeah.
And the further south you head, the worse it gets. I mean, I've heard of distilleries in Texas losing 47%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's hot, because there's it spends all of its time in the wood, and you just lose all of that spirit. Where in Virginia we get more constant interaction. And so, it'll be cold in the morning, so the whiskey will push itself back out, and then, it'll warm up as the day goes on, and it goes into the wood, and you get all of those, especially in the Cuvee, where you get those tannins or the color, and then comes back out.
Yeah.
So what's everybody think about this last one? We've been talking a lot of fun stuff, but we've also been sipping. So to answer your question from earlier, man, it is fun to do it in this way, because unlike the other way where I tried this one first and I was like, oh, I get that from the other ones. Since they're all in this, it makes it that I can pull it from there instead. So it's like it's seeing it in the reverse way, but in the more of like, oh no, that comes from this one. I can see this is from the Cuvee, this is from the sherry. Yeah, it's a fun reverse side of it for sure.
And we call it tasting the ingredients before you eat the cake. I have a sale at my local Texas guy likes to say, after we get done doing a tasting, he'll say, this is the eggs, the milk, and the sugar, and this is the cake.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, for sure.
I found it's unmuted. I found the Flagship the fiercest of them too. So it was a good escalation to do it this way. There's something really enigmatic on the identified, but it's quite lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah, right on.
To me, it's kind of that perfect blend of the sherry and the bourbon, and the Flagship kind of shortens the finish from the Cuvee. And so you start it with that bright, bourbon, the butterscotch, the vanilla, maybe a little bit of the citrus notes, and then you still get those heavy red wine fruit notes, but not quite as long of a finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think of food all the time, so I pair it with food quite a bit. Sorry, you're going to say something.
That's a good question. What would you pair it with?
Ooh, I like that question. I am a chocolate fiend, so I have done like a flourless chocolate tort with a raspberry coulis, but I also love cheese very, very much. So I love doing like a baked brie, puff pastry, drizzle some honey on top. Maybe some Granny Smith apples sliced on the side. So good. Charcuterie, you name it. It just plays real well with others. So,
graham crackers and brie if you're on a budget.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. That sounds like a great combination.
If you're not on a budget, the sherry went fantastically with the Sanagur.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastically yummy.
The sherry also makes for really, really good cigar pairing for anybody that's smoking while drinking.
Okay, well now you're talking my language, Mark. So yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see the sherry cask pairing well with a good cigar. But yeah, the last one I thought was the Flagship was, it definitely seems to be an amalgamation of everything that we've tasted, but more refined. It has a really nice balance to it. The very name Flagship would seem to suggest that, okay, well, we make all of these, but this is the one special one. Is that the intent of that name, or?
A little bit, yeah. I think it tells a really complex story. And this is the one that does evolve the most. I have sat with people and talked for an hour. And after the end of the hour, we've been sipping it for, a long time. And then it'll be like, where did this chocolate come from? I didn't get it before. Or where was this? And I will keep whiskey on my desk all day and keep watching how it evolves. And I'll even keep the empty glass and smell that sometimes too, and just get that, on brandy, they call it the fondue vert. And I just get so much out of it. It's fun.
it has just a beautiful nose to it, that's for sure. And by the way, I want a job where you keep a glass of whiskey on your desk all day long. That's the kind of work I want to be in.
Here's to that.
Yeah, I was about to say, that needs to be something I need to start doing at the store. Just be like, hey, we have geniuses that do it at the distillery. I need to do it to make sure I keep up with them,
Well, it's like an exercise, you're keeping your muscles, your smell muscles going. And
Totally.
Sure. Yeah. It's a tough job and somebody's got to do it. I get it.
Exactly.
Good an explanation as any for what you get to do all day long. Hey, Amanda, I want to give you props for the suggestion of setting some of the bourbon aside. I set it aside in a glass and the nose becomes unbelievably beautiful. I'd say one of the most beautiful that I've smelled. Just exquisite.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nicely done.
Thank you. I do like to just put a piece of paper over a glass too, and then come back to it for maybe even 2 days sometimes. And it's so fun to try to get something and then to achieve it. I never feel like I'm perfectly satisfied, but it's really rewarding to be like, oh, there's that chocolate torte I was looking for. There it is.
Nice. Right on. Well, all right. So what's everybody's favorite? I'm not gonna lie, all of them are delicious, but the Cuvee still stands out to me as that, the gold star of the group. Everybody else is right behind, but that Cuvee to me is still the prime one.
Yeah, I second that.
I agree. It really stood out from me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so okay, yeah, right on. Cuvee seems to be the favorite. Nice.
You're in good company.
Exactly. Yeah, you couldn't really. There's no wrong answer to this question, but no, it's cool to hear. Yeah.
We were a mix across the whole board between. We had some sherry, flagship, and Cuvee.
I love it.
Over here.
Yeah.
So.
Nice even mix.
That's cool.
Go.
Yeah.
That's a dream.
After the Cuvee, I really enjoyed the sherry.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very close second for me on those. It's grown on me over the last 2 years. When I first had it, it was a little much, but it's creeping up close to the close to the Cuvee for me.
When you have a good distillate, it's such a fun challenge to try to find something that speaks to different people's palates and still shows the core DNA of what that distillery is doing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No, that's one of the things I mentioned before was that the heart of Virginia Distillery, like you could taste in each of these. There's that same idea going around in each of them, but they all have, their different characteristics, obviously, but there's that same kind of not message because it's a whiskey, but it's that same mentality, same message that you're sending through that whiskey in all four expressions, which is very cool.
Awesome.
Well, right on, everybody. Well, thank you so much for coming out. Amanda and Mark, thank you for joining us. Amanda, thank you for all the information. This was really cool. As usual, we are going to give you all 10% off of any of these bottles that you'd like to purchase in the 750 form or the 50 ml as well. We will use the term, I like the musical chair note from earlier, Amanda. So musical chairs will be the code for this time if I'm not around at the store, which again, 5 days a week. So you guys most likely will see me, but if I'm not there the day y'all come in, just say, hey, if you're putting up a bottle of Virginia Distillery, just say, hey, musical chairs, and everybody will know to give you that 10% off the bottle as well. As a thank you for, hanging out with us on a Friday night and learning something about Virginia Distillery. But no, again, really appreciate your coming out. Amanda, Mark, thank you for coming in, zooming in from other parts. And staying up, well, not late, but being on it, 9 and 10 for us. So I really appreciate that. Anybody have any other notes?
Yeah, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Is the store going to carry all 4 of these? Or?
Yes, we have all 4 in stock at the moment.
Perfect.
So yeah, we have all of them available at the store. As I said, I will look into that port cask for you. There's someone here who will remind me about that in the next couple of weeks, in the next week or so. So yeah.
I'm sure she'll remind about it next week.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get a call to like, hey, buddy.
Yeah, tomorrow no morning, 9 a.m. Expect a message.
Exactly.
It's in stock in California, just saying.
Yes, but no, honestly, y'all, I really appreciate this. I have fun with these every month. I hope y'all do. I hope these are a way for you all to find something cool and interesting to talk about with your friends. Introduce people into new stuff. Especially with this being single malt, there's a lot of people who don't even know that America's making single malts, and this is the kind of whiskey that can get those people who only think it should come from overseas to think differently afterwards. So,
yeah.
This is the proof that the Scots aren't the only ones that can do it.
Yeah,
exactly. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. Kelly, sorry.
No, I was going to say thank you, Jeremy, for putting this together, and thank you so much, Amanda and Mark, for being part of this. It's been amazing. So, and thanks for making wonderful spirits for us all.
Very much.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Keep up the great work, and your enthusiasm comes through so abundantly. So you obviously love what you do, and we're tasting the result of that. So God bless you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Have a great night, everyone.
Yeah, to the labors of love, everybody. Thank you so much. Good seeing y'all.
Thank you.
See y'all soon. Amanda, again, thank you so much.
Anytime.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.